And we'll get started here with a video that our New Jersey chapter put together. It is one of my very favorite things right now that we've worked on with respect to this topic of talking about climate change. And I'm just going to play it for you, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
Everyone, Sarah's going to be here in a few minutes.
Hey, why is the cake out?
For the surprise.
It's ice cream. It's going to melt.
Oh, shoot. I wasn't thinking about that.
No.
What are you doing?
Putting the cake in the freezer so it won't melt.
It won't melt, it's cake.
It's ice cream.
Yeah, but it's a cake, so it's not going to melt.
Ice cream cakes don't melt unless you cut them open and put a piece on your plate.
What? That's insane.
Of course they melt. They're full of ice cream.
Yeah, but I mean, it'd be easier to just leave it. Plus, I mean, it looks so nice out. You know what? Settle this. What do you think?
Oh, gosh. You guys are the experts. I'm sure you'll find a solution.
How long's the cake been out for?
Since I picked it up.
See, it's fine. It hasn't melted yet. Why would it melt all of a sudden?
Because that's how ice cream works. It melts over time.
I actually don't like it when it's too cold, so this is great. Let's just, let it get a little gooey.
Gooey? No, look, we're already losing the polar ice cap.
Okay, no, this is not sustainable.
We have to take action. This is our responsibility.
We still talking about the cake?
Yes, of course we're talking about the cake. Hey, get your finger out of the ocean.
Why don't we just toss it in the fridge?
If we put it in the fridge, it's just going to melt slower, but it's still going to melt. It's not going to solve our problems.
Don't look at me. I'm not a dairy farmer.
Wait, it's ice cream. It needs to go in the freezer.
The cake's been around all this time without us meddling with it. Why would it need our help now?
Because that's how ice cream works.
Says who?
Everyone, you don't know anything about cake. Baking is about science.
Oh, really? Did scientists make the first ice cream? I don't think so.
Wait, did scientists make the first ice
Of
cream?
course not.
Then who did?
Okay, we have to stop arguing and do something. We're killing the cake. It's the only cake we've got.
Oh my God, it is just an ice cream cake. It's not the end of the world.
Hey guys.
Surprise!
Wow, you got me an ice cream cake.
Yeah.
Sure did.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Want a drink?
It's kind of melting there. I don't know if you noticed.
It's Earth.
That was done with the assistance of comedy writer Mara Altman, and is, I think, an incredibly deft display of why this is so hard to do, and all of the varying opinions, and why having a constructive and connected conversation about climate change is so hard in our era. So we're going to go through what we're doing today, what we're not doing today. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about climate silence. Ed Maibach, who you'll hear about, he's a very amazing researcher from George Mason, talks a lot about the great climate silence, meaning we all know climate change is happening, but we don't want to talk about it. How do we break the silence? What are the things that we can do in our social circles and that we can teach other people to do that will help make for constructive, connected conversations that actually might change attitudes about climate change or get people motivated? Things we're not going to do today. We're not going to use scripts. I think that it's the thing about scripts is in conversations is that it's really hard to have a good conversation where you can keep your partner on script. So they tend to be of limited utility. The other thing we're not going to do is turn this into memorizing a whole arsenal of facts about climate change that you can use to beat up your hypothetical climate denying Uncle Walter. And because, as you'll see, and we'll talk about this more, that rarely and almost, well, actually, no, it never works. So that's the things we're going to be doing today. And hopefully by the end of the workshop, you will have had some time to practice all the things you're learning. The last portion of this workshop is going to be us practicing what we've learned by having conversations with each other. So with that, we're going to turn to our first section, Theological Foundations in Climate Change Basics. And to do that, I'm actually going to make this interactive and turn to you guys, because it doesn't make sense for us to start this discussion with what I think. I want to know what you know about climate change. What are the things that you know and that you think is important for people to realize about climate change? Don't be shy. Okay, rainforest is on fire. The planet's lungs. Caused by human activity. You had something. Colombia this summer. Elaborate a little bit on that for me, please. Because I wasn't in Colombia for most of the summer. What else do we know about climate change? 3 1K year floods. In how many times? In what time frame? What else do we know about climate change? Collapse of the insect population. What else? Refugees, increase in refugees. My writing is horrible. What else? Melting polar ice caps. You watched the video. What else? Corn crops need irrigation. All right. So this is a lot of stuff. Declining water tables. Water battles. Okay. Less nutritious food. Okay. That's a lot of stuff. We could go all day. Exactly. That's the point. Is there is no dearth of information about climate change. And we do have a lot of facts at our disposal, and not just facts that are global facts, but facts that are local facts. What did I do with my clicker? There it is. Lose my click, my mind. So I'm just going to present a few basics, just so we're working from a shared understanding for this purpose. We'll talk later about why, in having conversations with people, having this bed of facts at your disposal isn't necessarily helpful in the conversation, but it's a good thing to start with because it helps give you confidence that you know what you're talking about. We'll talk about how that affects things. So what is climate change and how does it work? Well, we have the sun. And the sun not only delivers light and heat, but all different sorts of bands of radiation that come through the atmosphere, and they provide the warmth and the light that makes our planet fertile and makes it hospitable for life. And whatever the planet doesn't use gets reflected back out. It goes out through the atmosphere and back into space. That's how it's supposed to work. And we have some greenhouse gases. We have carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases to trap some of that heat, to keep the planet at a nice steady temperature that's hospitable for life. But what happens is when there are too many greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, too much carbon dioxide, too much methane, too much of these actually naturally occurring gases, it traps too much of that radiation and too much of that heat. And then the planet's surface, the average temperature of the planet starts to warm and the atmosphere starts to warm. And so when they talk about 2 degrees centigrade, you hear that a lot, 2 degrees centigrade, as sort of we have to keep the global warming below 2 degrees centigrade. What they are saying, what they mean by 2 degrees, is keeping the average global temperature from rising more than 2 degrees, which doesn't seem like much, but it's actually a lot. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. Why is climate change a problem? There are physical impacts of climate change. First one, and one that people here are probably familiar with, is sea level rise. This is a graphic that shows Charleston, South Carolina right now in the coastline. If the most extreme global warming scenario happens, which is, I believe, a 4 degree rise, 4.5 degree rise, this is what Charleston will look like. So what happens to all those people who own all that property around the edge? What happens to all those people whose homes get flooded out? And remember, the only entity you can purchase flood insurance from is the federal government. You cannot privately insure for flood. Why also? Rising heat index. This is for Columbia, South Carolina. And this is the number of days above 95 degrees since 1970. And the average number of days above 95 degrees has come close to doubling since 1970. This is Fahrenheit. This is Fahrenheit. This is days where the temperature rose above 95 degrees for each year between 1970 and 2018. Yeah, this is the average, and the average has been climbing consistently. And so what that means is, days above 95 degrees, what happens to construction crews? What happens to people who work outdoors? What happens to the elderly? Heat stroke and heat exhaustion are very real problems and very real health risks. In fact, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, most of the expense, the health expenses from climate change and from global warming are going to be related to heat exhaustion and treatment of heat stroke. Another physical impact. Y'all know about this one because you mentioned it before. Increased rainfall and flash floods. I had this problem actually a couple of weeks ago. The Washington, D.C. area got a flash rainstorm where I think literally it dumped something like 36 inches in 24 hours. And there were literally flash floods on some of the major arteries into downtown. It was pretty crazy. Actually, my son goes to camp at the local YMCA. The roof fell in on part of the building. So these were no joke. And we're going to see more of those. And in fact, if you look at this graphic, the Northeast especially and the Midwest are going to see it worse, but the Southeast gets hit pretty hard with the number of heavy precipitation rain events that put strains on systems. Yep, and they're just out of luck. The other problem you have is, stormwater systems are not prepared to handle the kind of rain that's coming. And one of the things when they talk about infrastructure includes things like stormwater management. And those systems are in many places around the country very antiquated, not set up to handle what's coming. This one's fun. The economic impacts. So that gray line there is the average spending on the average number of billion-dollar disasters for 1980 through 2017. The number of, so it starts down there about, under 5. That first number is a 5, the second is a 10, the third is a 15. So it starts with, it goes month by month, January through December. And that gray line, the lowest line, is the average between 1980 and 2017, the average number of billion-dollar disasters. So the numbers are going to climb during the months because obviously the total number climbs as more and more are added to the party. But what's interesting is that end state. The last 2017 and 2016, nearly twice the average, 3 times the average of billion-dollar disasters. We are having more, we noted it here, at least 3,000-year floods in the past 5 to 6 years. So over the past 30 or 40 years, we are seeing not just expensive disasters, but more very expensive disasters because of climate change. And in fact, there were a couple of EPA scientists that examined 22 different economic impacts related to health, infrastructure, electricity, water, and they estimated that by 2090, the impacts from those 22 sectors would cost about $224 billion per year. This was released just a year and a half ago. If we allow things to get to 4.5 degrees as opposed to 2.8 degrees. Now, to put all these degrees in context for you, if we meet the current pledges of the Paris Agreement, we can hold global warming to between 2.6 and 3.2 degrees. Note that's still not enough. Most scientists say we need to be at around 1.5 degrees to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. If we continue with current emissions policies, we're at between 3.1 and 3.7 degrees by 2090. If we continue to roll back emissions policies, we'll hit up to 4.7 degrees. So the health impacts for climate change in their study accounted for about 3/4 of that $224 billion a year, and more than 1/3 of that was from increases in heat-related deaths. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking at in terms of these billion-dollar disasters and how expensive climate change is and how much of a burden it becomes to the economy. Yes, sir. They're actually already relocating towns in Alaska. There's a town called Newtok, which is largely inhabited by indigenous people called the Yupik, and they are already having to relocate Newtok. And that's a very expensive proposition because climate change has caused the ground under their feet to literally start sliding into the water. Social impacts, and sir, you've just provided a nice transition to our next discussion point. So what happens when people who live on the coastlines have to leave their communities? You're seeing this with Newtok. You're also starting to see this in Miami. There are neighborhoods, most of the waterfront property in Miami was previously extremely wealthy people, but they can't live there anymore because they're seeing sunny day flooding, they're seeing sea level rise encroach on their property. So now they're starting to look inland. And what's interesting is most of the communities that live more inland in Miami are communities of color, Latino, Black communities. And now you've got these wealthy people coming in saying, we want your land because it's on higher ground than where we are. What happens when more and more communities are experiencing drought? We saw a little bit of this we're seeing a little bit of this in India right now. There are a couple of cities that are getting ready to have no water. We saw a little bit of this in California a couple years back. You see this every time your county puts on limitations on when you can water your grass. You see that in Virginia. But more and more water battles, as we talked about earlier. What happens when heat waves begin to shift growing seasons? Your point about the corn limits outdoor activity and impacts health. What happens when you can't send the kids outside to play for more than a month? How do we support justice? This is a group that I'm sure is very concerned about justice. That has been my experience at the Episcopal Church. When climate impacts disproportionately affect the poor. And lastly, what happens when these changes are happening not just in our country, but in every country? I have a very good friend who's an artist. Her name is Monica, and she has been working, her family is from Bangladesh. And her family is from a very small island called Katakali, which is about 30 miles from the coast near the coast, about 3-hour ferry ride from Dhaka. And she had gone there to do an art project connected to a women's literacy effort that she had been leading there, her family had been leading there for years, because Kathakali is where her family is from. And when she got there, she talked to the women. She realized that first of all, the entire island in 50 years will be underwater. And none of the villagers knew. And she immediately turned almost all of her practice to raising awareness about climate change and how it impacts these coastal communities in Southeast Asia, many of whom are very, very poor. So that's why climate change is a problem. How bad will it get? And this is the stuff we talked about before. If you can see, where experts say we need to be is at 1.5 degrees centigrade. We need to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees in order to avoid the worst impacts. There are some impacts that at this point are now baked in. If we meet all of the pledges of Paris Agreement, we can hold it down to 2.6 at best. Based on our current policies, 3.1 at best. If we don't have any emissions policies, we're looking at a minimum of 4 degrees, probably more like 5 degrees. That's catastrophic according to the research. To give you worldwide current policies, about 3.1 to 3.7 degrees. To give you an idea of what that means physically, in November 8th of 2018, the IPCC issued a report that talks about the difference in effects between a 1.5 degree world and a 2 degree world. So we're talking about, we're down in the bottom part of that graph now. And here's what the difference is. Freshwater availability in the Mediterranean drops by double in a 2 degree world as opposed to a 1.5 degree world. There is 10 centimeters more sea level rise and a higher rate of increase by 2100. Nearly 40% more increase in intensity of rainfall. And last, tropical regions would see crop yields decline almost twice as much. So that's what's at stake. That's sort of where we're going. And it's kind of depressing, and I'm sorry for that. We're going to talk a little bit more about solutions, but I figure perhaps this is the right moment to have an injection of some faith and some hope. And so I'm going to turn to Father Rob and let him take us through.